If you are into vintage electronics, you know that the prices have gone crazy in the last 5 or 10 years. And while everybody's looking at Pioneer, Marantz, a lot of people dismiss this vintage hi-fi brand, and they especially dismiss the receivers from the era that I'm going to talk about today. And they shouldn't, because they are probably the best deals in hi-fi right now. Now, there's no warranty. Now, there's no guarantee. Now, it may be dead on arrival. But at their price, does it really matter? So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about the best kept secret in vintage hi-fi. We are talking about realistic. My first receiver ever was a used realistic. Actually, I have one of them. This one right here. This is not the actual receiver, but this is the same model I had when I was growing up. This is the STA 700. A paltry 12 watts per channel, but when I was a kid, this thing was awesome. I had an Emerson CD player hooked up to it, which was Walmart's house brand of electronics. Back when Walmart actually sold separate components. It had everything I needed. It had balance control. It had bass tone controls, treble tone controls. It had a loudness button. It had one phono, one aux input. And you can get these for like $60 sometimes. You may need some efficient speakers though, but 12 watts in the early 1980s, in the 1970s, was way different from 12 watts today. This receiver was made from 1983 to 1984, retailed for $179, which was a very budget receiver even back then. I got it used though, because the store owner saw me in there all the time looking at it, and he finally took pity on me. He said, come up with $75 and you can have it. So I got it. And it was my entrance into separate components. I think I got it in 1987. And the reason why I remember 87 is because that was the year the NXS Kick came out. And that was my first CD. Very good first CD, in my opinion. I also got Poison, Open Up and Say Ah. Not as good, but NXS Kick still holds up. But we're not here to talk about the STA 700. We're here to talk about the STA 2270. Very much a step up in the realistic line. That receiver retailed for around $400 in 1986. So there's almost a little bit of overlap. The reason why these realistic 2000 series receivers are such a good deal, well, some of them are such a good deal, is because there was a bit of a transition out from the 70s analog tuner section to a digital tuner section. They are kind of the vintage ugly ducklings, and it also comes after 1983. A lot of people consider 1983 to be the cutoff of the golden years of the two-channel receiver. But, still made in Japan. This one right behind me, I think someone picked it up for me at Goodwill for about $20 and sent it to me because he knew I was a big realistic fan. I had another one, it was the 2080. That one was really good, so that one put out 80 watts a channel. But let's get to know the 2270 a little bit better. By the way, there's one of these on eBay right now selling for $125. So over here on the left, you have a big chunky power button. Boop, boop. Just like that, really cool chunky LED. Underneath the power button, you have a headphone output. I don't really use headphones that much when I am connected to a receiver, but it's there. Next to that, you have speaker A, speaker B, and this can drive two sets of speakers at the same time. Right here, you have a power meter of sort. It's marked as 8 ohms, but you know, it obviously works on anything else, all the way up to 75 watts. This receiver was rated at 65 watts. So anyway, these older receivers generally put out more power than they were rated for. Now here's something that's really interesting and was a hallmark of Realistic's higher end receivers, and that's having tone controls but having a mid-range control as well. So These are all detented too. Very nice metal knobs. Even the Pioneer stuff that was coming up in the early 80s was plastic. So Realistic really maintained a very nice build quality, and they used metal knobs on everything. So you have the mid-range control, treble over here. Next to that, you have a mono, a stereo, and a stereo expander. The stereo expander was kind of interesting because you would turn that on, and in theory, what it was supposed to do is increase or decrease the soundstage. In practice, it just kind of makes everything sound bad. Maybe it's like not working how it's supposed to be working, but in my experience, it didn't sound very good. Next to that, you have a whole bunch of presets for your favorite radio stations. And then the tune knob over here, memory here. We'll just turn on FM. And you tune it like that. Nice digital readout right here. Very nice. Very good. Presets over here, you have tape 1, tape 2, and then the dubbings right underneath here. The one thing is this type of plastic does pick up kind of like oil, so you might have to wipe it off every now and again. Phono. Underneath that, you have auxiliary TV. Back in the day, TVs had RCA outputs, so you could pipe the music from your TV. And then you get your FM right there, AM right there. Down here, you have the search button, FM mute, MPix fill. I tried to look it up and try to find a manual for it. Can't find it. And then you have a high fill right next to that. Over here, you have a 30 hertz cut. And I don't know if that is like a subsonic filter for the phono stage or not. And then over here, you got the magic loudness button, which I use, but on certain speakers, you really don't need it. One of the cool things about this receiver too is that you can use the tone controls in conjunction with the loudness control. So if you do have a little bit too much bass, you can turn it down. But what I kind of did is I just left the loudness off, and then I turned the mid-range down on the tone controls, and I was able to get the sound right where I wanted it, even when I was listening at lower volumes. And then over here you have a very nice volume control. It's all detented too, and it has little numbers all the way around. Then under here is your balance. Also metal. Also detented in the middle. Very nice looking. And then on the side you have real, I like this sticker. It says walnut grained vinyl veneer. So it's vinyl on the sides. I think some of these Realistic receivers have actual wood on the sides. On the back, you have all your connections. So on the top you have tape 1 in and out. Underneath there, you have all of your antennas. Aux right here, which is what I have my Gishelli Labs DAC hooked into. Phono stage right next to that with the ground wire right there. Speaker connections, which I don't love. They do feel a little bit cheap, but this one is still made in Japan. And then over on the other side, you have 2 AC plugs right over here. Realistic brand was introduced all the way back in 1954, and the name started off as Realist. However, there was a camera company that used that same name. They got into a bit of a battle, so Radio Shack changed the name. By the way, Realistic is Radio Shack's in-house brand. So Radio Shack changed the name to Realistic. That name was slapped on everything from walkie-talkies to I think ham radio, speakers, I think at one time even televisions, citizen band transceivers, 8-track tape recorders, cassette decks, and their well-regarded mock speaker lines. I remember the little Minimus speakers. I actually have a pair of those. I have a vintage pair of Minimus speakers that one of my awesome patron members sent in, and I used them as Atmos upward firing speakers upstairs. The brand was phased out in '94. They tried to make a comeback in 2016 with Bluetooth speakers, but it didn't work out, and Radio Shack went out of business soon thereafter. 2270 was actually made in 84, 85, and 86. 65 watts per channel into 8 ohms, also 4 ohms stable, 4 to 16 ohm. Digital, synthesized, tuning. Has discrete output transistors in its design, which contributes to the reputation for durability and sound quality. 2000 series, really underrated, really kind of the best kept secret in vintage audio. In my opinion, these guys were really considered B, if not C tier when it came to Pioneer, Marantz. Kenwood was probably a step down from Pioneer and Marantz, and Realistic was a step down from that. But I love them. Sonically, I think this thing is just great. I have a Yamaha CR800 receiver. I think that thing puts out similar specs, about 60 watts. There's a few on eBay from that era, but I don't see any CR800s. But I remember paying about $300. Fine folks over at Skylabs Audio did a once-over and replaced a whole bunch of caps and other components on it. My point is actually I prefer the sound of the Realistic a little bit above the Yamaha CR800. The cool thing about the Yamaha CR800 is it has a variable loudness control. Only has bass and treble tone controls, but the variable loudness control can kind of get you where I get with the Realistic. What is your experience with Realistic? It really was my gateway into hi-fi, and I know probably for a lot of people it was their gateway into hi-fi. Some people are really big fans of Realistic and really seek it out. I at one time had a whole bunch. I went on a bit of a buying spree when it came to vintage audio. Got a little obsessive about vintage audio. Right now I'm down to only 4 vintage receivers, but at one time I had about 12 of them. I do regret getting rid of my 2280. I just dropped it off at Goodwill. But if you can find the STA, any of the 2000 series, you're in for a treat. And most of the time, you're in for super high value when it comes to vintage audio. The STA 2100 is kind of Realistic's monster receiver. And those go for $1,000, sometimes $800 to, I found one on eBay for $1,100. One thing I love about the 2200 series is that they're a little bit younger and therefore a little bit more reliable. Maybe. There's really no guarantees in vintage audio. But if you're on a tight budget and you want something different and you're willing to take a bit of a chance, or if you want to dip your toe into vintage audio and you already have your other systems set up, then the STA 2000 series from Realistic is something that you should really consider. They're great, they're fun, they have a very dynamic sound, but a little bit spicy on top. So you may find yourself having to turn down the treble on the top, depending upon what type of speakers that you have. But you get Japanese build quality at some pretty affordable prices. If you like this video, you really need to check out my previous video. It was the death of iconic hi-fi companies like ADS, Infinity, Advent, Boston Acoustics. I talk a little bit about awesome vintage speaker brands that are no longer here. And we'll put that video right here. Go ahead and click on it. It's a lot of fun. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.